Picture this. You are standing on the sun-baked stone walls of Delhi. It is the winter of 1299. The wind blowing off the plains does not carry the smell of rain or dust. It carries the smell of horse sweat, raw meat, and terror. You squint into the horizon. The horizon is moving. A massive, undulating shadow is swallowing the earth, stretching as far as the human eye can comprehend. It is not a storm, it is a meat grinder. 200,000 Mongol cavalrymen are riding toward your city. These are not just soldiers. They are the apex predators of the medieval world, men who drink the blood of their own horses to survive, and who have turned the slaughter of entire civilizations into an administrative checklist. You grip your spear, but your hands are shaking so violently the wood rattles against your armor. You know the stories. When the Mongols surround a city, they do not leave survivors. They leave pyramids of skulls. You are breathing in the last few moments of your life. The apocalypse is not coming. It is already here. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand the sheer magnitude of the nightmare descending upon Delhi, you have to understand the geopolitical reality of the late 13th century. The Mongol Empire is not a conventional nation-state. It is a global plague. They have snapped the spine of imperial China. They have reduced the grand libraries of Baghdad to ash. They have trampled the armored knights of Eastern Europe into the permafrost. They do not fight wars to negotiate treaties. They fight wars to permanently delete cultures from the human record. And right now, the Chagatai Khanate, the most aggressive splinter faction of the Mongol war machine, has locked its sights on the wealth of the Indian subcontinent. They have bled the borders of India before. Previous incursions were rapid smash and grab operations designed to test the defenses and steal cattle. But the year 1299 is fundamentally different. The Mongol Supreme Commander Qutlugh Khwaja has issued a terrifying directive. He has strictly forbidden his horde from plundering the border towns. There is no casual raiding. There is no stopping to burn peasant villages. That single tactical decision is a death sentence. An army of 200,000 Mongols ignoring free loot means they are not here to steal. They are here to conquer. They are marching in a straight, suffocating line directly toward the capital to decapitate the Delhi Sultanate. Delhi itself is suffocating. The city is choking on its own terror. Hundreds of thousands of refugees from the northern provinces have flooded through the gates, fleeing the Mongol advance. They are packed into the streets like livestock, starving, weeping, and spreading rumors of the demonic atrocities committed by the invaders. The food supplies are evaporating. The air is thick with the stench of unwashed bodies and impending doom. The city is a fragile glass bottle, and the pressure inside is building to a catastrophic breaking point. Panic is the ultimate weapon in the Mongol arsenal. They engineer psychological collapse long before they fire the first volley of arrows. They expect the city to tear its own throat out in sheer desperation. But the Mongol intelligence has missed one crucial detail. They believe they are marching against a standard monarch, a soft aristocrat who will cower behind stone walls and eventually offer tribute to save his own skin. They are horribly mistaken. The man sitting on the throne of Delhi is not a king. He is a monster. The Mongols have marched to the edge of the world expecting to slaughter sheep, completely unaware that they are about to step into the cage of a starving tiger. To understand the collision course these two empires are on, You have to look at the man sitting in the center of the bullseye. The Mongols are used to breaking soft men. They ride up to a city, present a severed head or two, demand submission, and usually the local monarch empties his treasury to buy another year of breathing. They expect the ruler of the Delhi Sultanate to play this exact game, but Alauddin Khalji does not play games, and he certainly does not pay tribute. He's not a king born of divine right or gentle succession. He is a usurper who bathed in his own family's blood to steal the crown. Just a few years prior, Alauddin wanted the throne held by his uncle and father-in-law, the aging Sultan Jalaluddin. He did not launch a noble rebellion. He invited the old man to a peaceful reunion on the banks of the Ganges River. As the elderly sultan stepped off his boat and embraced his nephew with open arms, Alauddin gave a silent nod. His assassins stepped forward, drove their blades into the old man's spine, and severed his head. Alauddin then placed his uncle's bleeding head on a spear and paraded it through the military camps, showering the horrified soldiers with stolen gold coins to instantly purchase their loyalty. This is not a man who understands the concept of yielding. This is a paranoid, highly functional sociopath with a massive god complex who actively mints coins, referring to himself as the second Alexander. When the reality of the Chagatai Khanate invasion of India reaches the royal court, panic infects the room like a virus. Alauddin's royal council begs him to be reasonable. His closest advisors, seasoned veterans of border skirmishes, drop to their knees. They present the logical, undeniable mathematics of their impending doom. The Mongols have an estimated 200,000 light cavalrymen. The Delhi Sultanate history is heavily steeped in warfare, but even their battle-hardened army is vastly outnumbered and facing a qualitatively superior foe. The advisors plead with Alauddin to lock the massive city gates, heavily fortify the defensive walls, and wage a slow war of attrition. They tell him that marching out to face the most lethal mobile army on the planet in an open field is not just tactical suicide, it is the deliberate eradication of their entire civilization. Alauddin quietly listens to his trembling council. He looks at the sweating nobles, the men who have grown fat and comfortable behind the illusion of stone walls. And then he speaks. He tells them that a king who hides behind walls to save his own skin is already a corpse waiting to rot. He argues that if he cowers in his own capital, he will lose the single most important currency holding his violent empire together, which is absolute, terrifying respect. He knows that his rule is built entirely on fear. If he shows even a fraction of an inch of weakness to the Mongol horde, his own ambitious generals will smell the blood in the water, turn on him, and slit his throat in his sleep. For Alauddin Khalji, this impending battle is not about saving the lives of the starving citizens of Delhi. It is about his ego and his absolute grip on power. It is about proving that he is the ultimate apex predator in a world completely infested with monsters. He makes the most insane, brilliant, and reckless military decision of the 13th century. He orders the towering gates of the city to be thrown wide open. He's not going to hide. He is going to march his entire army directly out into the flat, dusty plains of Kili and look the apocalypse dead in the eye. He is betting his life, his stolen throne, and the lives of millions of innocent people on a single, desperate roll of the dice. The Mongols might be the undisputed masters of open-field combat, but Alauddin has a response being prepared in the war camps. He is about to unleash a different kind of monster onto the battlefield. The plain of Kili is a flat, desolate expanse of baked earth. It is the absolute perfect theatre for the Mongol war machine. When you look across the battlefield, the Chagatai army does not look like a traditional medieval force. They do not form rigid, static walls of shields. They operate like a massive predatory organism. They communicate through a complex system of black and white flags and the terrifying rhythmic thud of giant kettle drums. Every single man is mounted. They are armed with a composite bow, an engineering marvel of horn, wood, and sinew that possesses a draw weight capable of punching a steel-tipped arrow through solid armor at incredible distances. Their entire doctrine revolves around distance, speed, and psychological exhaustion. They want to encircle the enemy, rain an uninterrupted storm of arrows upon them, and watch them slowly bleed to death without ever crossing swords. Against this mobile nightmare, any standard European or Middle Eastern army would eventually collapse from pure exhaustion. But Alauddin Khalji is not fighting a standard war, and he is not using a standard army. As the Mongol drums reach a deafening crescendo, a new sound reverberates across the Kili plain. It is a deep, guttural roar that vibrates through the soles of your boots. The ground begins to physically shake. Emerging through the morning dust is the Delhi Sultanate answer to the Mongol swarm. They are rolling out the biological tanks of the ancient world. 300 armored war elephants are stepping onto the front line. These are not mere beasts of burden. They are heavily modified, deeply traumatized instruments of mass destruction. Each animal is covered in custom-forged coats of chainmail and thick leather padding, rendering them practically immune to standard arrow fire. Bolted directly to their massive ivory tusks are heavy iron scythes coated in poison and designed to slice a horse and its rider in half with a single swing of the head. Strapped to the back of each elephant is a wooden tower housing a squad of elite crossbowmen and spear throwers who can fire down upon the enemy from an elevated, mobile fortress. But the most terrifying aspect of these creatures is not their armor, it is their mental state. Before the battle, the handlers do not calm the animals. They deliberately drive them into a state of psychotic fury. They force buckets of fermented wine and raw opium down the throats of the elephants. By the time they reach the vanguard, these massive beasts are completely unhinged, their eyes wide with drug-induced rage, feeling absolutely no pain, and desiring only to crush whatever stands in front of them. They are living, breathing wrecking balls. This creates a catastrophic problem for the Mongol cavalry. The Mongol horses are arguably the most disciplined mounts on the planet, trained to endure freezing temperatures and endless marches. But a horse is still fundamentally a prey animal. When a horse smells the overwhelming musky scent of an enraged elephant, its biological hardwiring takes over. The smell alone triggers pure, uncontrollable panic. The Mongols suddenly find themselves fighting two enemies at once. They are fighting the Indian army, and they are fighting their own terrified horses who are desperately trying to buck their riders and flee the battlefield. When the two forces finally collide, it is a collision of completely incompatible physics. The Mongols try to execute their signature tactics, galloping in to loose their arrows, but the arrows simply bounce off the thick steel plates draped over the elephants. In return, the drugged behemoths charge directly into the Mongol formations. It is a slaughter. The impact of a 4-ton animal slamming into light cavalry is completely devastating. Horses are tossed into the air like broken toys. Mongol riders are trampled into the dirt, their ribs completely pulverized under feet the size of tree trunks. The iron scythes on the tusks swing through the Mongol ranks, severing limbs and decapitating men in a blinding spray of crimson. The invincible Mongol swarm suddenly finds itself bogged down in a horrific, bloody meat grinder, completely unable to stop the advancing wall of screaming armored muscle. Alauddin Khalji watches this carnage from his command tent with cold satisfaction. He has forced the greatest open-field fighters in human history to engage in a brutal stationary brawl where their mobility means absolutely Nothing. The screams of dying Mongol horses echo across the plain, a sound that the Chagatai commanders have never heard before. For the first time in their lives, the apex predators of the steppes are looking up at something bigger, stronger, and significantly more violent than they are. The psychological shockwave hitting the Mongol front line is almost as destructive as the physical impact of the elephants. They are not just losing men, they are losing their absolute certainty of victory. When the battle lines finally engage, the sky above Kili physically darkens. The Mongol archers do not fire individually, they fire in orchestrated rolling waves. Imagine the sound of 100,000 tightly wound composite bows snapping at the exact same fraction of a second. It does not sound like whistling, it sounds like a sudden, violent tear in the fabric of reality. A solid wall of iron-tipped wood drops from the sky. Men are pinned to the earth, shields are shattered. The sheer kinetic energy of the barrage is designed to flatten the front ranks before a single sword is swung. But the Indian infantry does not break. They raise their heavy shields, brace against the dirt, and step over the twitching bodies of their brothers. Within minutes, the dry earth of the plain is churned into a suffocating vortex of dust. Visibility drops to mere feet. The battle degrades from a grand tactical maneuver into a blind, claustrophobic slaughter. You cannot see the banners. You cannot hear the orders. There is only the frantic, gasping struggle to drive a spear into the man directly in front of you before he drives a blade into your throat. Men are suffocating on the suspended dirt and the coppery stench of spilled blood. This is the horrifying reality of the deadliest medieval battles. It is not glorious combat, it is an industrial-scale butchery where human bodies are fed into a grinding machine of iron and panic. The Mongols desperately try to maintain their distance, utilizing their legendary hit-and-run tactics, but the sheer mass of the Delhi army, anchored by the unstoppable momentum of the war elephants, creates an inescapable gravitational pull. The elephants act as moving fortresses, breaking the Mongol lines and creating pockets of absolute chaos. The heavy Indian maces and curved talwars do horrific damage at close quarters. The Mongols rely on boiled leather and thick silk undergarments, designed to tangle arrows, not to stop a heavy iron mace from completely caving in a ribcage. When a Mongol horse loses its footing in the rapidly forming mud of blood and entrails, the rider is instantly swallowed by the crushing tide of Indian infantry. There is no quarter given, there are no prisoners taken, throats are slit, and armor is violently pried open to deliver the killing blow. Behind the Indian lines, Sultan Alauddin Khalji ensures that his men do not experience a single moment of hesitation. He has positioned a vanguard of his most ruthless executioners directly behind his own infantry. Their orders are incredibly simple. If any soldier takes a single step backward, his head is immediately severed from his shoulders. The army of Delhi is trapped in a fatal paradox. In front of them is the apocalyptic fury of the Mongol horde. Behind them is the cold, guaranteed steel of their own ruler. The only direction they can move is forward, driving themselves deeper and deeper into the center of the meat grinder. The noise of the battlefield reaches a sickening crescendo. It is a symphony of snapping bones, dying horses, and the gurgling screams of men drowning in their own punctured lungs. The elephants continue their relentless rampage, their poisoned tusk scythes amputating limbs with terrifying precision, tossing the broken bodies of the greatest cavalrymen on earth aside like useless rags. The Chagatai commanders frantically signal with their flags, trying to coordinate a tactical withdrawal to regroup, but the dust is simply too thick. The communication network that makes the Mongol army so deadly is completely neutralized by the sheer environmental chaos. The Mongols, accustomed to watching their enemies turn and flee in terror, are suddenly experiencing a horrifying revelation. The men they are fighting are not afraid of them, because the men they are fighting are infinitely more terrified of the tyrant watching them from the rear. The unbreakable Mongol wave has finally crashed against an immovable, blood-soaked wall, and for the very first time in a generation, the wave is beginning to fracture, while the center of the battlefield degenerates into a claustrophobic, suffocating meat grinder of elephants and infantry. A completely different kind of tension is boiling on the right flank. Commanding this wing of the Delhi army is a man named Zafar Khan. To the citizens of the Sultanate, he is a celebrated hero, but to the Mongols, he is a terrifying living myth. In previous border skirmishes, Zafar Khan did not just defeat Mongol raiding parties, he actively hunted them. He is the only military commander on the subcontinent who has successfully inflicted the exact brand of psychological terror upon the Mongols that they usually reserve for their own victims. His reputation is so legendary that Mongol commanders reportedly use his name to frighten their own horses into obedience. Zafar Khan sits on his armored warhorse, watching the apocalyptic clash in the center. He is a master of mobile warfare, commanding the finest heavy cavalry the Delhi Sultanate has to offer. He knows exactly how to break the Mongol formation, but he has been given a strict, unbreakable order from Sultan Alauddin Khalji. The order is to hold the line. Do not advance. Do not engage unless explicitly commanded. It is a strategically sound order designed to maintain the defensive wall. But Zafar Khan is not looking at strategy. He is looking at an opportunity to shatter the spine of the Chagatai Khanate once and for all. What the history books often gloss over is the deeply toxic, paranoid political climate of the Delhi court. Alauddin Khalji is a usurper who trusts absolutely no one, and he is deeply terrified of Zafar Khan. Zafar is too successful, too brilliant, and far too beloved by the military. In Alauddin's paranoid, sociopathic mind, every victory Zafar claims is just another step toward a military coup. Zafar Khan knows this. He knows that his own ruler views him not as a savior, but as a fatal threat. He knows that if he survives this battle by passively standing on the sidelines, Alauddin will eventually find a way to quietly poison him in his sleep. For Zafar Khan, the battlefield of Kili is not just a defense of India. It is a horrific, inescapable trap set by his own king. He is a dead man walking, caught between the unstoppable Mongol horde in front of him and the paranoid executioner sitting on the throne behind him. So, the greatest general of the age makes a decision that will echo through eternity. He decides that if he is going to die, he is not going to die quietly in a dark palace dungeon. He is going to die bathed in the blood of his enemies, executing a maneuver so violently insane that history will have no choice but to remember his name. Without waiting for the signal from the center, Zafar Khan draws his sword and screams an order that openly defies the Sultan. He commands his entire heavy cavalry division to charge. It is an act of absolute treason, and it is a tactical masterpiece. Thousands of heavily armored Indian horsemen explode from the right flank, driving a steel wedge directly into the Mongol left wing. The impact is catastrophic. The Mongol light cavalry, already struggling to comprehend the chaos of the elephant charge in the center, are completely unprepared for a sudden, blistering flank attack by armored veterans. Zafar Khan does not just break their line, he shatters it. He carves a bloody, screaming path through the Mongol ranks, his sword moving with the mechanical efficiency of a butcher. The Chagatai warriors, recognizing the banner of the man who haunts their nightmares, begin to actively pull back. They are not retreating tactically, they are breaking under the sheer, unadulterated violence of Zafar's assault. He pushes them back 1 mile, then 2 miles, then 3 miles, driving them further and further away from the main battlefield. He is winning, is He is single-handedly tearing the invincible Mongol war machine to pieces. But as the dust settles and he pushes deeper into the enemy lines, he realizes he has made a fatal miscalculation. He looks back over his shoulder, expecting to see the rest of the Delhi army moving up to support his miraculous breakthrough. But the horizon is completely empty. He is totally alone. The Mongol retreat is the most fatally misunderstood maneuver in the history of medieval warfare. To the uneducated observer, it looks like a chaotic, desperate stampede of broken men, but it is not a rout. It is a highly orchestrated, terrifying choreography of murder. When Zafar Khan shatters the Chagatai left wing, the Mongol riders do exactly what they have been conditioned to do since childhood. They break their rigid formations, they scream in theatrical panic, and they run. They even drop perfectly good weapons and saddlebags to sell the illusion of a disorganized collapse. To the heavy cavalry of the Delhi Sultanate, the sight is intoxicating. The adrenaline of the charge, the smell of fear, and the sight of the invincible Mongols fleeing like beaten dogs triggers a primal, predatory instinct. Zafar Khan knows the danger. He is a veteran of the bloody frontier, and he understands that chasing a Mongol is like chasing a ghost into a graveyard. But he is a man trapped by his own brilliance. He knows that if he stops, if he returns to the main line, without delivering a crushing, undeniable victory, his paranoid sultan will have him quietly executed for treason. Driven by this toxic, impossible reality, Zafar spurs his exhausted warhorse forward, driving his men deeper and deeper into the suffocating cloud of dust. For miles, the chase continues. Zafar's heavy cavalry, weighed down by thick chainmail and iron-plated armor, are burning through their physical reserves. Their horses are foaming at the mouth, their lungs burning in the dry, choking air of the Kili plains. They are being mathematically pulled out of the safety of the main army's orbit. The Mongols are stretching the Indian line like a rubber band, waiting for the precise moment it loses all its kinetic energy. 18 miles away from the main battlefield, the trap finally snaps shut. The illusion of the retreat evaporates with horrifying suddenness. The fleeing Mongol light cavalry do not slow down, they simply pivot. Without a single shouted order, communicating only through the silent, rhythmic beating of a distant kettle drum, thousands of Mongol horses turn on a dime. The panicked screaming instantly stops. The disorganized mass of fleeing riders flawlessly uncoils into a perfectly formed, impenetrable ring of iron and sinew. Zafar Khan pulls brutally on his reins, his massive warhorse rearing up as the dust begins to settle. He is not looking at a broken army. He is looking at 30,000 fresh Mongol reserves who have been sitting in the sun waiting for him to arrive. 10,000 composite bows are raised in perfect, terrifying unison. The mechanical creak of wood and bone being drawn back sounds like the cracking of a glacier. Even in this nightmare scenario, Zafar Khan does not despair. He is a master tactician. He knows that he has drawn a massive chunk of the Mongol horde away from the center. He turns his head, looking back over the miles of churned earth, waiting for the hammer to fall. He expects to see the towering silhouettes of the war elephants and the royal banners of Sultan Alauddin Khalji rushing over the ridge to catch the Mongols in an unbreakable vice. He expects salvation, but the horizon is entirely empty. There is only the wind blowing the dust over the dry earth. Miles away, safely entrenched behind his wall of heavily armored elephants, Sultan Alauddin Khalji is watching the distant, swirling storm of Zafar's ambush. Inside the royal command tent, his generals are frantically dropping to their knees. They are begging for the order to march. They explain the tactical mathematics that their greatest commander is trapped, but a swift reinforcement right now would permanently break the spine of the Mongol invasion. Alauddin does not draw his sword. He does not shout. He takes a slow, deliberate sip from his jeweled goblet and coldly commands his army to hold their ground. He watches the distant dust cloud with the dead, unblinking eyes of a reptile. This is not a failure of courage. It is a calculated, premeditated assassination. Alauddin is weaponizing the Chagatai Khanate, using the greatest military machine on earth as his own personal execution block. He is deliberately sacrificing his finest general, along with thousands of his own elite soldiers, simply to cure his own political paranoia. Zafar Khan stares back at the endless sea of Mongol arrows, and the freezing, horrific truth washes over him. The barbarians in front of him want to destroy his city, but the monster sitting on the throne behind him wants him dead. The greatest warrior in India has been abandoned to the wolves. Zafar Khan is entirely surrounded by a living wall of 30,000 hostile riders. The dust settles, revealing the sheer, hopeless mathematics of his situation. The supreme commander of the Chagatai Khanate invasion of India, Qutlugh Khwaja, rides to the front of the Mongol lines. He raises a hand, and the 10,000 drawn bows lower slightly. Qutlugh Khwaja is a pragmatist. He looks at Zafar Khan, covered in the blood of hundreds of Mongol warriors, and he does not see an enemy. He sees a weapon of mass destruction. He sends an envoy forward, offering Zafar Khan the unthinkable. He offers him absolute amnesty, a royal title, and a high command within the Mongol war machine. He gives the Indian general a choice between a meaningless death in the dirt or a glorious life conquering the world. Zafar Khan sits on his trembling warhorse and looks at the envoy. He looks back at the empty horizon, toward the capital, where his own ruler has happily signed his death warrant. He knows perfectly well that if he surrenders, he lives, but he also knows the nature of the monsters he is fighting. He spits a mouthful of blood into the dust and delivers his answer. There is no grand philosophical speech. There is no poetry. He simply tells the envoy to return to his master and prepare to die. Zafar Khan orders his remaining heavy cavalry to dismount. Their horses are completely blown, their lungs burning, their legs shaking from the 18-mile pursuit. They are useless now. The Indian soldiers slaughter their own mounts, using the massive armored carcasses to build a makeshift barricade of flesh and steel. They form a tight, suffocating circle of shields, spears, and heavy maces. They are no longer an army. They are a cornered beast. Qutlugh Khwaja drops his hand, and the sky instantly turns black. The Mongols unleash a storm of arrows so dense it blocks out the afternoon sun. The sound is a deafening, continuous hiss. Heavy Indian armor deflects hundreds of strikes, but the sheer volume of iron falling from the sky is an undeniable law of physics. Men are pinned to the earth, armor is punctured, and limbs are shattered. But the men of Delhi do not scream. They break the arrow shafts off their own bodies, close the gaps in the shield wall, and wait. When the quivers are completely empty, the Mongol cavalry charges in to finish the butchery. But they are making a fatal psychological error. They expect to find broken, weeping survivors begging for mercy. Instead, they charge directly into a meat grinder. Zafar's men know with absolute certainty that they are going to die today. That realization strips away all human fear. A soldier fighting to survive is dangerous, but a soldier who has already accepted his death is a walking apocalypse. They do not fight to protect themselves. They fight purely to inflict maximum agony. As the Mongol light cavalry crashes into the perimeter of dead horses, they are violently ripped from their saddles. Indian heavy maces cave in Mongol skulls with the sickening crunch of breaking pottery. Curved talwars sever arms at the shoulder. Zafar Khan fights like a man possessed by a violent demon. His armor is pierced in a dozen places, his breath is ragged, but he refuses to stop moving. He becomes a mechanical engine of slaughter, cutting down Mongol veterans with terrifying cold efficiency. The Chagatai warriors, the undisputed masters of global conquest, begin to actively pull back in sheer horror. They are watching their brothers being literally torn to pieces by a handful of dead men walking. Qutlugh Khwaja watches from a safe distance, and a cold, paralyzing dread begins to pool in his stomach. He is losing thousands of his most elite, irreplaceable veterans to a single, isolated battalion. The screams echoing across the plain are not the sounds of a glorious Mongol conquest. They are the sounds of an empire bleeding to death in the sand. Zafar Khan fights until his muscles physically tear from the bone. He takes a spear through the thigh, an arrow to the shoulder, and finally a blade to the neck. He falls, choking on his own blood, disappearing under a swarm of desperate Mongol infantry. His men fight until the very last heartbeat, refusing to yield a single inch of ground. When the dust finally settles over the massacre, the Mongols do not cheer. They stand in absolute, horrified silence. They stare at the massive mountains of their own dead, piled high around the broken body of an Indian general who simply refused to break. Night falls over the Kili plain, but the darkness brings absolutely no comfort. The wind sweeping across the flat earth carries the sickening copper stench of 50,000 bleeding corpses. In the Mongol camp, there is no celebration. There is no drinking of fermented mare's milk, and there is no triumphant beating of the giant kettle drums. There is only a profound, suffocating silence. The Chagatai warriors, the undisputed masters of the known world, sit shivering in the dark. They are wrapping crude, linen bandages around their shattered limbs, staring blankly at the ground. They have successfully eliminated Zafar Khan. Mathematically, they have won the right flank, but psychologically, their entire worldview has just been violently shattered. You must understand the fundamental architecture of the Mongol war machine to grasp the magnitude of what is happening in this freezing camp. They are an empire built entirely on the weaponization of human terror. They do not just defeat armies, they mentally break civilizations before the fighting even begins. But today the psychological dynamic has completely inverted. They did not break the men of Delhi. The men of Delhi broke them. Qutlugh Khwaja, the supreme commander of the horde, stands outside his tent, looking toward the distant flickering watchfires of the main Indian army. He is not calculating his next brilliant tactical maneuver. He is experiencing a deeply unfamiliar, paralyzing emotion. For the first time in his life, he is feeling genuine, unadulterated fear. He looks at the horrific butcher's bill of the afternoon. To kill one isolated, totally abandoned Indian general, the Mongols had to feed thousands of their finest, most experienced veterans into a meat grinder. Zafar Khan and a handful of doomed men inflicted catastrophic, generational damage upon the Chagatai horde, and the absolute most terrifying realization creeping into the Mongol command tent is that the main army of the Delhi Sultanate has barely even started fighting. Qutlugh Khwaja looks across the pitch-black plain and visualizes the nightmare waiting for him at sunrise. He pictures the 300 armored war elephants, still violently intoxicated, still covered in the crushed remains of his vanguard, waiting to smash his surviving cavalry into the dirt. He pictures the dense, immovable wall of Indian infantry, completely desensitized to death, driven forward by the absolute psychopathic ruthlessness of Sultan Alauddin Khalji. The Mongols have finally traveled to the edge of the map and encountered an enemy whose appetite for extreme, industrial-scale violence actually exceeds their own. This is the silent, unglamorous reality of the Mongol Empire defeat at Kili. It is not a sudden, dramatic collapse under a hail of arrows. It is a quiet, freezing realization that if they draw their swords tomorrow, they will not just lose a military campaign, they will be entirely erased from the human record. Qutlugh Khwaja makes a decision that permanently stains the legacy of the Khanate. He issues a whispered, urgent order to his surviving officers. There will be no morning assault. There will be no glorious sacking of the Indian capital. They are going to pack up their wounded, turn their horses around and run. The retreat is executed with the desperate, quiet panic of men fleeing a burning building. They wrap the hooves of their horses in thick wool and leather to completely muffle the sound of their departure. They leave a few campfires burning low as a ghostly decoy, desperately hoping to deceive the Indian scouts just long enough to put miles between themselves and the madmen of Delhi. The mighty Chagatai Khanate, the apocalyptic terror of the medieval world, is literally sneaking away in the dead of night, terrified that the monster sitting on the throne of India might wake up and decide to hunt them down. When the morning sun finally bleeds over the Kili plain, the Indian army stands in perfect formation, gripping their weapons, fully prepared for the world to end. But the horizon is completely empty. The overwhelming storm of the Mongol horde has simply evaporated, leaving behind nothing but an ocean of rotting flesh and the brutal, undeniable truth that the only way to survive a monster is to become something infinitely worse. When Sultan Alauddin Khalji rides out onto the blood-soaked plain of Kili the following morning, he does not fall to his knees and thank the heavens. He does not weep for the thousands of men who died to secure his throne, and he certainly sheds no tears for the betrayed Zafar Khan. He simply stares at the endless horizon where the Mongol horde evaporated into the dust. A lesser king would have declared a month of feasting. A lesser king would have assumed the nightmare was over, but Alauddin is a highly functional sociopath with a genius-level intellect for violence. He looks at the mountains of rotting flesh, and he realizes a terrifying mathematical truth. The Mongols did not lose their empire, they merely lost a vanguard. They will return, and next time they will bring a bigger hammer. To survive the Chagatai Khanate, Alauddin understands that he cannot simply rely on geographical choke points or the occasional suicidal heroism of his generals. He has to fundamentally rewrite the DNA of the Delhi Sultanate. He must transform a chaotic, fractured kingdom into a totalitarian, hyper-militarized fortress. He needs a massive, permanent standing army, a force so heavily armed and strictly disciplined that it can look the apocalypse in the eye without blinking. But armies of that magnitude require an astronomical amount of money, and the royal treasury is not infinite. So, Alauddin decides to fund his new war machine by financially butchering his own citizens. He unleashes a wave of economic terrorism upon his own empire. He implements a system of absolute, draconian price controls across every single market in the Sultanate. He dictates the exact price of grain, the price of horses, the price of fabric, and the price of human slaves. This is not a benevolent economic policy designed to help the poor. It is a ruthless extraction method designed to keep the cost of maintaining a massive army artificially low. And the enforcement of these laws is spectacularly brutal. Alauddin unleashes a network of secret police into the marketplaces. If a merchant is caught shortchanging a customer by even a fraction of an ounce, the Sultan's guards will literally slice the exact equivalent weight of flesh directly off the merchant's body. Fear becomes the supreme currency of India. Nobles are stripped of their inherited lands. Wealth is aggressively confiscated. Alcohol is completely banned, not for religious purity, but to prevent aristocrats from gathering in taverns and plotting rebellions. Alauddin deliberately impoverishes his own elite class so that no one has the financial resources to challenge his authority. He crushes the spirit of his own people to forge an unbreakable shield of iron. He raises a standing cavalry force of nearly 500,000 men, a logistical miracle in the medieval world. He takes the oceans of stolen wealth and pours it into a massive defensive network, repairing the ancient forts along the Mongol frontier and building entirely new ones. He garrisons them with hardened killers who understand that retreating from the border means facing the executioner in Delhi. The borders of India become a lethal obstacle course designed specifically to bleed the Mongol cavalry of its momentum. The wall that saved India from the Mongol Empire was not just made of stone and mortar, it was made of pure, unadulterated human terror. Alauddin Khalji essentially turned the entire subcontinent into a heavily fortified prison camp, and he appointed himself as the undisputed warden. The tragic, twisted irony of this dark chapter in history is that his sociopathic methods actually worked. The Chagatai Khanate would launch several more massive invasions into India over the next decade. Each time they smashed headfirst into Alauddin's newly forged military machine, and each time they were violently repelled, suffering catastrophic casualties until they simply gave up. Alauddin Khalji successfully stopped the most unstoppable force in human history, but the price of that salvation was the absolute subjugation of his own world. He saved the sheep from the wolves by becoming a far more terrifying predator. History is a heavily edited manuscript. We are taught to romanticize the past, to look for clear lines separating the heroes from the villains. We want the noble Spartans at Thermopylae. We want the brave knights defending the realm. We completely ignore the Battle of Kili because it shatters that comfortable illusion. There are no heroes in this story. There is no shining beacon of morality. The Battle of Kili is the terrifying historical proof that sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to build a bigger, more psychotic monster. The Chagatai Khanate invasion of India should have been the final chapter of the Delhi Sultanate by every metric of medieval warfare. A massive horde of highly mobile veteran Mongol cavalry should have easily dismantled a stationary, fractured kingdom. They had successfully deleted entire civilizations from the map using the exact same strategy. But they failed to account for the sociopathic genius of Sultan Alauddin Khalji. He did not defeat them with superior morality or divine intervention. He defeated them by completely outmatching their capacity for extreme industrial violence. He sacrificed his greatest general, Zafar Khan, without a single second of hesitation, using his own men as human bait to psychologically break the Mongol war machine. When the Mongol survivors limped back to the steppes, they carried more than just physical wounds. They carried a psychological virus that slowly infected the entire Chagatai Khanate. The myth of their absolute invincibility was permanently shattered. They had been beaten not by the freezing weather, not by a lack of supplies, but by an enemy who looked them dead in the eye and simply out-slaughtered them. This defeat created a massive ripple effect across the entire geopolitical map of Asia. Because the Mongols could not crack the Indian subcontinent, they were forced to redirect their military aggression elsewhere, forever altering the destinies of countless other nations. The Delhi Sultanate, despite the horrific internal tyranny of its ruler, remained a towering, bloody fortress that preserved Indian culture, wealth, and architecture from being permanently reduced to ash. And yet the Western world has largely forgotten this apocalyptic clash. We memorize the dates of minor European skirmishes, but we ignore the day an Asian empire broke the spine of the greatest land empire in human history. Perhaps we ignore it because the aftermath is deeply uncomfortable to digest. The wall that saved India from absolute annihilation was built directly upon the crushed skulls of its own citizens. Alauddin Khalji turned his empire into a heavily fortified prison camp. He saved his people from being slaughtered by foreign invaders, only to systematically terrorize them himself. He survived the Mongols, but he could not survive his own paranoia. Years later, isolated, physically rotting, and trusting absolutely no one, the Sultan was quietly assassinated by his own favorite general. The ultimate apex predator was put down by his own guard dog. The Battle of Kili forces us to look into the darkest, most uncomfortable corners of human survival. It teaches us that peace and security are rarely bought with noble intentions. They are almost always purchased with blood, betrayal, and absolute ruthlessness. The men who died in the suffocating dust of that plain were nothing more than currency spent by a tyrant to secure his own throne. Their bones have long since turned to dust, but the brutal lesson of their sacrifice remains entirely relevant today. If you found this deep dive into the ruthless mechanics of medieval warfare fascinating, please help this channel survive the algorithm by hitting that like button and subscribing. We are building a massive library of history's most brutal and forgotten moments, and I want you to be a part of it. I also have a question for you to answer in the comments below. Do you think Alauddin Khalji was justified in sacrificing his own people and his best general to save the empire, or did his methods make him worse than the Mongols he defeated? I read every single comment, and I would love to hear your perspective on this dark moral dilemma. If you want to see what happens when another supposedly invincible army makes a fatal miscalculation, click the video on your screen right now to watch our breakdown of the Battle of Bannockburn. Until next time, remember that history is not a fairy tale. It is a warning